What's up, SpaghettiOs and SpaghettiOs? So, you think you know the spaghetti episode of Rick and Morty? Well, before we start, I want to give a warning. The episode we're discussing today has depictions and discussion of some very sensitive topics, which could be upsetting or triggering to some viewers. So consider this a trigger warning for, unaliving oneself. I hate that YouTube makes me say it that way, but that's what I gotta do or they won't show this video to anyone. So if you're particularly sensitive to that kind of stuff, maybe skip this one. I won't be mad. Okay? Okay. Also, spoilers ahead for Rick and Morty. So for those still here, there is a massive problem with this episode. Bad enough, in fact, that basically the entire second half of the story just would not have happened based on the rules the first half set up. The episode in question centers around a planet very similar to Earth, where the humanoid aliens that live there turn into spaghetti if they end their own existence. The way Rick explains it is that
their cortisol increases the starch content in their bloodstream, changing their intestines into one long spaghetti noodle and the surrounding tissues into a spicy sweet hematoma that we would call a bolognese. But it takes a lot of cortisol, like a
unaliving
amount.
It's almost better cold!
Oh geez, it's gonna be a miracle if this episode doesn't get demonetized. So right up front, the episode establishes that it's the amount of cortisol that causes the spaghettifying effect. Remember that, because it's gonna be important later. Cortisol is a chemical commonly referred to as the stress hormone, because, well, our bodies release it when we're under stress. The more stress we're under, the more we release. And it can have major physiological effects. In real life, high amounts of cortisol can suppress the immune system, alter your metabolism, decrease bone formation, lead to depression or anxiety, and more. And in Rick and Morty, it can turn an alien's guts into an Italian pasta dish. Man, this is a weird show. Now, the main conflict of this episode arises when Morty, upset at having been deceived by Rick about the source of the spaghetti they've been enjoying, tells the people of Spaghetti Planet about the whole situation. In response, the leadership of Spaghetti Planet starts shifting all their resources into getting people to spaghettify themselves, and then packaging and selling the resulting spaghetti. This, of course, upsets Morty even more, so he convinces Rick to try and find a way to make the spaghetti without having to cost human lives. And this is where the problems start. The first big issue comes when Rick tries making clones and having them produce the spaghetti so that quote-unquote real humans won't have to die. But that goes about as well as you'd expect, with two of the clones escaping and killing each other so that they don't turn into spaghetti because they ended each other's lives, not their own. Okay, now do you see the problem here? Remember, Rick said it was the amount of cortisol that made them become spaghetti. And you know what? I'm pretty sure that finding out you're a clone and you were bred for food, breaking free of your prison, running for your life through the woods, and then shooting your one true love while they also shoot you would also result in some pretty gosh darn high cortisol levels. So really, these clones should have turned into spaghetti, but they don't. Now, you could argue that the situation the clones went through wasn't quite as stressful as the usual spaghetti making process. I would strongly disagree, but fine. But even if you do feel that way, things get even worse as the episode progresses. After the failure of the clone factory, Rick creates, what is essentially a torso with no limbs or head, just human enough to turn into spaghetti, but with no higher brain function or thoughts or emotions. They then give them a single hand so that the torsos can stab themselves with an ice pick. Jesus, this show is weird, and thus produce the spaghetti. But wait, the whole point here is that the torsos aren't conscious. They have no thoughts or emotions to speak of, which is why Morty feels it's okay to turn them into spaghetti. But if they have no thoughts or emotions, or indeed awareness of their surroundings, or even their own existence, then they would be incapable of feeling stress, which means no stress hormone. And remember, Rick says that it's the amount of cortisol that turns them into spaghetti. You have to be under so much stress that your body is flooded with stress hormone, to the point it transforms your innards into spaghetti. But these torsos aren't stressed. That's the whole point of using them instead of real humans or clones. They don't feel any stress because they don't feel anything. So by the show's own rules, these torsos couldn't produce spaghetti, but they somehow do anyway, and everything seems like it's gonna be fine. But then some protesters bust in and blow up the factory, and the whole planet's society basically collapses. Rick says he can fix everything if he just had one more person to turn into spaghetti, and it just so happens there's a terminally ill old man who only has a few days left to live. Rick broadcasts the man's thoughts about his long and complex life for everyone to see, while the man pushes a button that releases some chemicals and he slowly passes away. Then, Rick cuts open the man's chest to extract the spaghetti, also for everyone to see. All the aliens who had previously been trying to get spaghetti are disgusted when confronted with the reality that they had been eating real people with deep and complex lives and their own thoughts and feelings, and demand for spaghetti drops to zero. Hooray, the day is saved. But it shouldn't have been. Again, this shouldn't have worked. I know I may sound like a broken record at this point, but the spaghettification is caused by extremely high levels of cortisol, and this guy would have had nearly zero cortisol in his system. He was slowly, peacefully, and gently being put to sleep, finally being released from all the pain he had been in, while happily reflecting on his life. He died with a relaxed and contented smile on his face. Somehow, that doesn't seem like the face of a man whose system is so filled with stress hormones that it turns him into pasta. Now, I realize this is a pretty crazy concept to start with, people turning into spaghetti and all that. But look, I don't make the rules here. If Rick had said that it was just unaliving that caused these aliens to become spaghetti and left it at that, then the entire episode would work fine. But he didn't. Instead, he went into detail and said that it was cortisol, specifically, that causes the transformation. And then the rest of the episode completely ignores that. Listen, I'm sorry, Rick and Morty, but if you're gonna go out of your way to establish specific rules that you could have just left vague, then you have to follow those rules. If you say that it's high cortisol levels that cause people to become spaghetti, and then have a bunch of instances people becoming spaghetti when they didn't have high cortisol levels, and also a ton of instances where people did have super high cortisol levels but didn't become spaghetti, I'm gonna call you out on it. So yeah, Rick and Morty usually does a better job of thinking their plots through and following their own rules. But in this case, they really dropped the meatball. I guess the writers just didn't use their noodles to think through all the possibilities. And you know what? That kind of messy writing makes me saucy. Boiling mad even. They really failed to meet my expectations. And this isn't just a tomato-tomato situation. It makes a big difference. I've seen some big plot holes in my life, but boy are these some of the worst. I am so sorry for those puns. I kept them all in until the end of the episode, but look, I'm only human. Anyways, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed that video, you'll probably enjoy my other Rick and Morty video, detailing why a spaceship is less than 1/4,000,000,000% as efficient as it should be. Or perhaps my video on why the Dark Avatar from Legend of Korra completely breaks all the rules the show established for how the Avatar works. And listen, if you or someone you know experiences thoughts of hurting yourself or worse, please seek help. There are people who care, and there is hope. I realize this video talks about some heavy stuff, and in some cases it seems like the show is kind of making light of these things, but this is a very serious topic. If you feel like you need help, reach out to someone. I'll put some links and phone numbers on screen and in the description, so for your own sake and for the sake of those who care about you, please utilize those resources if you feel you need them. Anyway, this has been So You Think You Know, and now you do know.